Tornadoes are not common, but hardly rare in the province of Quebec. As a matter of fact, of the 426 tornadoes tracked in Quebec between the years 1980 and 2009, only 7 were considered a disaster. That is distinguished by incidents where people were hurt or property was damaged. Hi, I'm Chris May, writer, producer, and host of This Day in Weather History, now in its second year from the Weather Network in Canada. The July 6, 1999 twister, however, is a rare exception. This day in weather history. On July 6, 1999, a tornado ripped through 3 Quebec towns, Berthierville, Namaska, and Drummondville. It did do extensive damage to property as it tore roofs off homes, leaving 200 people in need of temporary shelter and resulting in 1 death. That death was sadly and tragically a child who was killed when a tree collapsed on his tent while he was camping in Drummondville. And it was in Drummondville where most of the damage was caused. In all, about 60 homes and 30 cars were severely damaged. 200 people had to leave their homes for the night. Emergency shelters were set up in southwestern Quebec. It is estimated that about 4,000 people in the tornado's path were without power after the storm knocked down several hydro poles. This was the second power disruption due to weather in the same week. Just 2 nights earlier, a violent storm knocked out power for close to 500,000 Quebecers in Montreal, the Eastern Townships, and the Laurentians. The mayor of Drummondville, Quebec had no choice but to ask for government assistance in the wake of this tornado. Welcome to year 2 of this podcast. Right now, you're listening to the full version of today's story on your favorite podcast provider, but there's also the daily podcast video short. They're shot right here in my podcast recording studio, so you get that perspective, and oftentimes they will include visuals from that day's event from when it happened in weather history. So after listening to the full story, go check out the podcast video short on television or online anytime at theweathernetwork.com/weather history. Now, this is just another case where it may not have been the strongest or even a strong EF-rated tornado, but when any storm does damage or takes even 1 life, it is serious and it is remembered forever. The same goes for seasons. Tornado seasons don't need to be particularly active because it will take just that one event to drive people from their homes, ruin a utility infrastructure, and take a life, and it's remembered as a deadly and brutal season. Let this stand as a reminder that when scanning the history books for the most remarkable storms, not all are created equal, and the tornado that struck the Eastern Townships was a destructive and deadly storm and needed to have its story retold for this reason. I'd like to remind you where you can catch this podcast if you might be picking this up off our site or from within a story. You can look up or ask for This Day in Weather History, wherever you normally listen to your favorite podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Alexa, and now every day on yahoo.ca. Tomorrow is July 7th, and we will look back at the 8th wonder of the world, comparable to the Great Pyramids of Egypt and a vision in the desert. It was on July 7th, 1930, when construction of the Hoover Dam began. This one is going to be really cool. Hey, do you like the podcast? We'd love to hear from you. If you have an idea, go right now to wherever you're listening to me and rate us if you would, please. It's on a 5-star system, and we would love as many stars as you can afford. So rate us, but then also review us. This way we can always stay on top of how you'd like to see the show evolve. Then remember to subscribe to this podcast. Click the subscribe or follow button right there on the very same podcast homepage you're listening on. You'll be immediately reminded that the next day is ready to listen to, and you also have access to every episode in the archives. It dates back to June 1st of 2020, so there is a lot that we got to get caught up on this day in weather history. And with that, I'll speak to you tomorrow when we hit up the first day in what would prove to be a modern-day engineering marvel, if not miracle, the start of the construction of the Hoover Dam, the project that had to happen because of the weather. That's tomorrow, July 7th, 1930. This day in weather history with me, your host, Chris May.